The more you learn about business, the more you learn about life in weird ways. And that perfect day exercise, when I was asked to do it, I was like, why am I doing this? I came to you to learn how to do a business. I want to know how to market my product and this and that. And she had me do it. And I realized, oh my goodness, now I get it, because now I know how to structure the business to achieve that. You can look at business as your career, or you can look at it as a tool to give you the life you want.
Hey Hatchlings, welcome to the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm your host, Hayley Akins. So today on the show, we've got Joey Korenman from School of Motion. It was so much fun to talk to him. We talked about things like how best to handle revisions with your clients, the pros and cons of branding yourself as a studio versus an individual freelancer, and also how to deal with pushback on your pricing, and just so much more. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Hey Joey, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Hayley. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's great. I really wanted to get you on because we mentioned some of your stuff quite a lot already with other guests, so I thought it would be perfect. I just wanted to start by asking you, you're bringing out so many courses now, and I know you have children as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what the day in the life of Joey is like now?
Well, you're right. I do. I have 3 children, and my youngest is 2. So I have little children, and my life is chaos. So School of Motion originally was just my blog, and I did these tutorials on Vimeo, and I didn't really think anything would come of it. And when it finally started to get some traction, I was very fortunate that at that point, I actually hired a business coach. And so one of the things that this coach had me do was something called the perfect day exercise. And I actually talk about this I talk about it a little bit in the book, but I wrote a guest post for Motionographer a while back called Too Old for MoGraph. And I talk about this. And essentially what you do is you sit down and you imagine the perfect Tuesday, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, just a normal day, not like a holiday or a special day. And you write every detail of that day down. What time do you wake up? Is it sunny outside? Who are you in bed with? How much money do you have? What are you doing for work? How many kids do you have? What are you eating for breakfast? And you try and fill out all these details. And then you sort of look at the trajectory you're on in life and you say, hey, am I aiming towards that perfect day, or am I aiming somewhere else? And so when School of Motion started to take off, I was able to sort of aim it in the direction I wanted rather than just kind of hang on and let it drag me along with it, which happens to a lot of people when business starts to take off. So my day-to-day is pretty sweet. I wake up early because I'm an early riser. I'm really into running and exercise. And recently I just got into Bikram yoga, which is hot, sweaty yoga for anyone listening who's into that. I usually get to my office around 9:30 or 10, and I'll leave at 4 every day and go home and be with my family. And the only reason that's possible is because I have an amazing team. So School of Motion is not just me anymore. There's myself and 4 other people full-time. And we have teaching assistants who help with the classes, and we have 14 of those now. So we have a pretty incredible team, and we've kind of set things up to be as automated as possible and as easy for the students to access as possible, so that it isn't an 80-hour grind like it was when I was running a studio back in Boston.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. It's awesome to be able to go in at 9 and leave about 4. I mean, I think everyone would love to do that. Is your team all remote?
Yes, they're all remote. So right now we have team members in Michigan, in Texas, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, and then I'm in Florida. So nobody is in the same state. And we're all in pretty close time zones, which helps. And then our teaching assistants are all over the world. We have one in New Zealand, we have one in Germany, we have one in Canada, and then we have TAs all over the United States. We had one in Poland for a while, and she took some time off because she had twins. So to me, I think that's always been a goal, is to not have the traditional office and to not have I write about this in the book too, that feeling that your butt has to be in a specific seat at a certain time for a certain number of hours in order to be productive, that never really made sense to me. So I kind of designed School of Motion to be the opposite of that. I don't really care where people live or what their hours are, as long as they're getting done what needs to get done. So yeah, everybody's remote.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are doing that now. Like, I'm sure Buffer is one of them. Like, I'm sure that most of their team are all remote. It kind of, it's this like location independent movement. I don't know whether that, like, you've heard much of that, but it's just really interesting because I think it would be kind of like contradictory if you like had an office full of people when you're kind of talking so much in the book about, if you work remotely, then you have more freedom and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because I've thought about that a little bit. Like I didn't really think of it at that level. Like, ooh, I got to make sure appearances are kept up and that I'm actually practicing what I'm preaching. But I think that's just a sign that like what I wrote in the book is really what I meant. I mean, another example is at School of Motion, we don't have a vacation policy. You take as much vacation as you want. And, if you want a day off, you just take a day off. Like there's a company called 37 Signals. And they make a product called Basecamp. It's like a project management software. And I think it was the founders of that company wrote a book called Remote. It's a great book for anyone who is thinking of starting a company or who is already running a company or even at a company. And it goes into like a lot of detail about how they manage to be a pretty big company. I want to say they had like 30 or 40 employees, but only like 7 of them are actually in the same city and the rest are all over the world. And they make it work. And the advantages are amazing. I mean, to be able to hire talent, like for example, I'm in Sarasota, Florida. If I wanted to hire a rock star product manager to help build our learning platform, our website, and I wanted someone with experience doing this in a startup environment, it's really hard to find those people here because, this is like a retirement community. It's like it's families and retirees and a lot of healthcare. So my product manager lives in Massachusetts, right near Boston, where there's tons of that. I just talked to Zach Dixon from Animalators, who also runs a studio called IV in Nashville, Tennessee. And they have a full-time animator that lives in like Chicago or something. So I think more and more studios are doing that. So, even though we're not a studio, like we're not a motion design company really, I think even motion design studios now are kind of catching on, and certainly clients are catching on that they don't need you to be in the same city as them to do the work.
Yeah, I mean, I had Margot's on the podcast already. I don't know whether you've heard of him, but he's an illustrator that does stuff like the New York Times and stuff like that. And he basically travels around the world and works while he's doing that. And he was just so cool to talk to about that. And he was telling me funny stories about how once in Thailand, his electricity went off and he had to do this project for the New York Times. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you open yourself up to that kind of experience and you sort of say, I'm going to attempt to undo decades of brainwashing by the media and school and just the way business kind of trains you to think, you really, like, anybody can do that. My product manager who lives in Massachusetts, she recently bought, it's called a Vanagon, and it's a Volkswagen van that I guess is famous in these little niche circles. And people buy them and they fix them up and they live in them. And she doesn't live in it, but like sometimes we do these weekly calls on Monday. Like our whole team gets together Monday morning and we do a call. And sometimes she's in this van, I'm like, where are you? And she'd be, I'm in the middle of the woods. I just drove to New Hampshire. Our newest team member is Caleb Ward, and he's been writing and creating a ton of the video content for the site lately. And right now, he's basically traveling for a month with his wife. They're in California right now. They were in Utah before that. They're crisscrossing across the country, and he's just brings a laptop and does his job when he can, and just make sure, he's given a task. You need to have 3 pieces of content each week, plus emails, plus social media posts, all that stuff. And it doesn't really matter to me, if he does that all at once, and stays up for 3 days and does it for 2 weeks and then takes the rest of the time off. Doesn't matter as long as it's getting done. I just encourage more employers to take that attitude. It seems to be working. We're still really small. I don't know if it works if you get to the size of 40, 50 people, although, 37 Signals is still doing it. So yeah, I'm excited to see where this whole remote thing goes. I think it's only going to grow.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm kind of looking more towards doing that. I think I was saying on the Brograph podcast, I think about 80% of my clients are remote, but because I'm in London, people are still like, oh, but you're just down the road. Come to our office.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I have my own studio. I'm staying here. Do you know what I mean? Because eventually I don't want to be in London. I think, I'd rather be somewhere else. I'm not originally from here. So that makes sense to me to kind of work towards that goal as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really handy. Location, I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter. Being in London, you have an advantage in that you could just, take the tube. Am I saying it right? I always forget what it's called in different places. The tube, right? Yeah. Like head over or hop on the bus and go to Cub Studio and meet with Fraser and meet whereas someone in Kansas or someone in Germany, it's not as easy to do that, and so you are more likely to be able to get booked at places in London because you can go meet them face to face. But once you've made a name for yourself, you can live wherever you want. And even if you never do live in one of the big cities, LA, New York, London, Chicago, maybe Sydney, I don't think it's going to matter much for much longer. It's just too easy to work remotely, especially on motion design stuff, especially if you're a designer. If you're an animator and you're doing heavy 3D stuff with lots of renders and that, it may still be helpful, to be in the room with people. But I think with the tech that's coming out, Slack makes it just so easy to share your screen. And now you can even control the other person's screen. And you're getting really close to having that experience of I'm right next to you and we're working together, and except we're 2,000 miles apart.
Do you think that it should be everyone's goal to kind of be remote? I mean, it's whatever you want in your life, right? But like you were saying in the Freelance Manifesto book, you can kind of design your life the way you want it to be if you are working remotely, and you can choose your clients, I guess.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that everyone should be remote. I think it's kind of what you just said. It comes down to what your goals are. So, for example, when I was in my, right before School of Motion started to become my full-time gig, I was freelancing full-time, 100% remotely from Florida. And that made total sense for me because I had small children and I had a house and, I was in my 30s and I had kind of gotten over the honeymoon phase of my career where it's I just love this and all I want to do is get on Motionographer and MoGraph.net and do tutorials all day. You get past that and all of a sudden your life, you reprioritize, especially if you have a family. And so I didn't care that I was never in the room with my clients and that I was never in the room with other artists working together in the pit like I used to, But in my 20s, when I was 24, 25, I would have hated living in Florida and working by myself in my house. That would have been awful for me. So it just depends what point you are in your life. Even in the book, I recommend if you're really young and you don't have any experience, it's very hard to just start freelancing. And that experience of working with a team is amazing. The good thing is, I think pretty soon it's going to be possible to have that experience even if the team is all over the globe. You'll never quite get the same thing as being in the room, but it's getting pretty close. And I think that the key is just as you get older, just constantly reevaluate what your goals are. And, this was the point of that Motionographer guest post I wrote. It was the goal I set when I was 25. I didn't reevaluate it until I was 32 or 33. And by that point, my life was very different and my goals were different. I just never readjusted my path. So that's when I made the decision, I want to be able to work from anywhere. I don't really care about the building I'm in or even the city I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, you said so much great stuff there. I'm like, it's leading on to all my questions. I don't know where to start. But can we just go back a bit? Because Sure. You're talking about the designing your perfect day. I'm sure that I read this in Pat Flynn's book, Will It Fly? I know that you're aware of that because I've got a funny story. Is there something was that something to do with him as well? Or was that kind of, you knew that before that?
So is the perfect day exercise in that book in Will It Fly?
I'm pretty sure. I think he rewords it I can't remember what it's called, because it's all his associations are all to do with flying, right? So It's something to do with that, but I can't remember.
Right. Here's some inside baseball with that book. So for everyone listening, Pat Flynn is sort of a online business. I don't want to call him a guru, but he's more like he's a really good teacher. And he has a podcast and a blog called Smart Passive Income. And when I left my previous life in Massachusetts as a creative director and I moved to Florida to start my teaching career, I drove my car from Massachusetts to Florida with just me and my cat, and the rest of my family flew. And I had 22-hour drive, and I listened to 30 or 40 of his podcast episodes. And that's really what inspired me to give School of Motion a real run and go full time at it. And I had the really good fortune when I hired my business coach, when it started to take off. Her name is Jamie Masters, and she is good friends with Pat Flynn and is in what's called a mastermind group with him. They're like a business group. They meet. And so she introduced me to Pat. I got to go on his podcast. So Pat and I, and it's a really small world once you get into the world of online business. But as far as the perfect day exercise goes, I mean, it's like a common thing. I didn't come up with it. I probably got it from my business coach, Jamie Masters, who has her own podcast, but she probably got it from Debbie Millman or from Tim Ferriss. And I'm sure Pat Flynn got it. So it's just one of those things that's always been out there, and I don't know where it originates from. And there's a lot of stuff like that. It's weird how business, when you think of business, most people think of really kind of left brain, analytical, gross stuff. But what I've learned is really interesting is the more you learn about business, the more you learn about life in weird ways. And that perfect day exercise, when I was asked to do it, I was like, why am I doing this? I came to you to learn how to do a business. I want to know how to market my product and this and that. And she had me do it. And I realized, oh my goodness, now I get it, because now I know how to structure the business to achieve that. You can look at business as your career, or you can look at it as a tool to give you the life you want, which is pretty much the main message in the book.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got a funny story to add on to that you met Pat Flynn. I didn't know that you were on his podcast. I mean, I feel like I've listened to loads of his podcasts as well, and I somehow I've not seen that. But anyway, I'll carry on. So I was reading his book, Will It Fly, when I was thinking about starting Motion Hatch as well. And I was thinking, okay, because basically Will It Fly is about testing your kind of business ideas and coming up with an idea that you think that people will want. So, that is going to actually help people. So I was going through this book, and I'm okay, thinking, about Motion Hatch in my head. And then I'm all right. And then Pat Flynn's okay, so now we're going to go to some case studies. And I'm right, cool. And then I turn the page, and it's Joey from School of Motion, literally the first example. And I was oh my God, what the hell? Because obviously I was aware of School of Motion, but I didn't realize that you had any sort of association with Pat Flynn. So I was just whoa. I was now I have to do Motion Hatch because, Joey's done School of Motion, and I love Pat. It's the gods have spoken.
Well, I'll tell you something. You brought up something I think everyone listening should hear, which is that. So that book, right, it's about validating an idea you have without having to take a bunch of risk. Because, to start Motion Hatch podcast, you could have said, well, I need to have 20 interviews in the can, and I need to have a perfect web page, and I need to, have a Facebook page, and I need to have at least 1,000 fans before I ever start. And Pat's message in that book is do the minimum thing you possibly can and see if anybody even wants it. And the example that he used for me in that book is our first course that we sold. We actually sold it before we ever created it. Essentially, I held a webinar and I described the class, which is now called Animation Bootcamp. And I was I'm going to build this class if enough people buy it. and it sold out instantly in like minutes. It's like all the spots sold out. So of course I built it. But if only 10 people had bought, I would have refunded their money and I wouldn't have made the class. And so there was almost no risk to me. And so anyone, like Haley, who's thinking of branching out from just doing client work and building something that maybe can give you a little bit of passive income or potentially become your full-time gig like School of Motion did, there's always ways to test it. And it's crazy how easy it is to get this information now. Pat Flynn, if you just go to Smart Passive Income and you start at the beginning and you try to get through as much of the content as you can, just give yourself 3 months. By the end of it, you'll be an expert. It's all there. I didn't invent anything that I'm doing. I just followed the guidance of people like Pat and Jamie Masters and Tim Ferriss, who is like my hero. I like put him in the Freelance Manifesto like 5 times. It's all there, You don't have to like guess anymore.
So in the book, you say when you work for someone else, you have no control over the work you do. And you repeat that quite a lot of times, which I think is great. But I think you caveat that you think that people fresh out of uni should probably get a full-time job first, kind of learn the ropes and, maybe get some contacts. Do you think that's always the case? Or do you think there's kind of another way to get into freelancing without kind of having a full-time job?
So here's why I recommend that people fresh out of school or whatever, like fresh into this industry, why they don't jump right into freelance. It's not because they're not talented enough. It's more about the mental side of it. So like I remember when I got my first job right out of college, and the job I got had nothing to do with what I learned at college. I had a film and television degree, so you would think I learned how to edit and maybe do some After Effects in there. I learned how to edit on a Steenbeck, which is like one of these old, reel-to-reel film machines. And I think I had one class that mentioned After Effects. But I got hired as an assistant editor on doing Final Cut Pro and doing After Effects stuff because I knew After Effects. And, the day before I started working, I had no idea if I was good enough. I didn't know if I was worthy of being paid to do any of this. And then the next day I was being paid to do it. And I realized nothing has changed. I haven't gotten any better. I guess I was good enough all along. I just needed some outside person to kind of verify that for me. And mentally that like turns a switch in your brain, I think, that gives you a ton more confidence, which you need if you're going to freelance. If you can't muster up some semblance of confidence, freelancing is going to be very hard. And I also think too that if you've never been through the entire cycle of a job comes in and you come up with ideas and you pitch those to the client and they like one of them, and then you finesse it and polish it and get revisions. And then at the last second, they change one thing and then you deliver it. It's almost like the seasons of the year. There's just kind of a rhythm to that you need to get used to, because then when you're freelance, you don't have any buffers around you to kind of reinforce that and maintain that rhythm. So, you'd basically be completely just pretending you knew what you were doing in terms of client management and project management if you haven't actually done a real project for money for a real client. So that's why I recommend getting a job. And I think too, like a lot of students come out of school. Like if you go to school for this, or most people don't go to school for this. If you went to like Ringling or SCAD or Hyper Island, you'd probably be equipped to come right out of school and jump into like a situation, like a client situation. But most people don't. They come out of a digital arts program or a digital media program, and they really don't know what they're doing, and they're not good at anything yet. And you need a couple of years just to calibrate yourself to what's good and what's bad, and give yourself time to develop your eye a little bit more and recognize, oh boy, what I was doing as a student that I thought was awesome is really terrible. And you see that instantly when you start working and you're in the industry and you start paying attention to motionographer and stuff like that. So it's more about seasoning the person. I don't think you necessarily develop like better chops. I mean, all of that happens, but I think it's more about developing like a sense of the rhythm of the real world and just developing your eye, Yeah,
I agree. I mean, when I was working at Google, we had like a few interns, And, they came straight out of like animation courses and stuff. And they kind of like were a bit shocked, I think, because we were like saying, oh, can you just like do this boring like little project thing, like some kind of text animation or something like that. And they kind of all had like their own like really nice styles or whatever. And they just were really shocked by the fact that we were like, no, but you just need to do this thing because that's what the client wants. It can't always have your like stamp on it or whatever.
It's really interesting you bring that up because this is one of the things that, Joe Donaldson, I think he's like the head editor now at Motionography. He's sort of running the content over there. So he lives very close to me. He teaches at the Ringling College of Art and Design right down the road from me. And we've had I wouldn't say like arguments, but sort of like debates about this because, when you go to an animation program or a design program, I always come at things from the practical standpoint. I think that's just my personality. So like everything at School of Motion is built around the idea that we want to teach you useful, practical skills you're going to use every day that are going to help you pay the bills and become a better motion designer. And that's our thing. That is not what art schools do, though. And Joe went to like a traditional art school where, you have to find your personal voice and you're doing these like fine art projects and you're doing these things that have seemingly no relationship to a real world client job. And I think that if you go to school in an environment like that, that's when you get shell shocked and you go to Google and you're like, my portfolio has all these paintings in it and I can do cell animation. And I learned After Effects, but I really have like a style that I like and I'm good at. And then Google's like, that's great. Here is the material design guidelines and I need you to animate these 4 dots. And so I almost feel like, I don't know, like motion design to me, and I may get flack for this, but I feel like it's a little bit of a trade, and sometimes it's hard for us to accept that. And, there are certainly people out there, G Monk and Ash Thorpe who like, it's hard to call what they do a trade. It is certainly art. They elevate what they do. But the vast majority of us, when we're getting paid to do this, we're not making that stuff. We're not making amazing key art for Blade Runner, right? We're animating the Google logo for the Android loading screen or something. All of the courses that we do, we try to make these very real world feeling projects. And my thought is that I think you want to prepare students for what they're going to be doing. If your goal is to make money doing this, chances are you're going to be doing stuff like that. And you're not going to be doing title sequences for the Avengers all the time. Even the companies that do those probably don't make money on them and probably only do 1 or 2 of those a year,
Yeah, definitely. I think, if you have a good style and it's sellable to like the advertising agencies and stuff, then yeah, maybe. But most people don't have that. And certainly not when they first come out of university. So I think it can be like a bit of a shock sometimes. It's something like you have to build up. I mean, it's kind of a different way of thinking to the illustration industry. Because like I said, I was talking to that guy, Margos, he's amazing. I mean, he has some like massive clients and stuff. And he like said, he just didn't get paid and he just took like a few years to develop his own voice. So, there is that direction you could go down, but generally motion designers, I think, if you're going on the corporate route, then you probably are going to do like the money jobs. And I know you talk a lot about that in the freelance manifesto as well, about how, you can just do some of the jobs for money, like if they pay well and like, maybe they're not that interesting or whatever. And then you can kind of do some like passion projects as well.
Yeah. Well, so it's really interesting that you brought up the illustration thing. So that's an industry I don't really know much about. I don't know about the finances of it and really how it works. But I do know that motion design in general, let's say, the average motion design project will take an order of magnitude longer to produce and bring to fruition than, an illustration, that you've been hired to create, for the New York Times or something like that.
Yeah.
You see these incredible photorealistic illustrations people do with ballpoint pens and stuff, and it takes 40 hours or 60 hours to do. And that's a long time to spend on an illustration like that. I mean, that would be just the starting point for the most basic of motion design projects. So it's possible, that would be my guess, is that the economics are different because the amount of work to create a piece of motion design is so different. So, if you look at I think Oddfellows is a great example, right? Like they did the opener for the most recent Blend festival and it was unbelievable. It was amazing. Have you seen it, Haley? It's like cell animated.
Yeah.
It's so good. It I was there, I was watching it and I was almost crying. I was like, this is way too good. And I'm thinking, my God, how much time did they spend on this? It must have been months. But how are they going to do that without doing a bunch of huge projects for Google or Airbnb, companies that, and the thing about Oddfellows is that almost anything they touch just looks amazing. But if you look at the Google 5-piece they did, which is beautiful and great and fantastic, I bet they had a lot more fun and they would much rather do the Blend thing over and over again, but it's not reality, So maybe as an illustrator, you have a little bit more flexibility. I would imagine that that's a much harder gig to be in, to be honest, because there's so much more competition. The barrier to entry in illustration is lower in terms of, everybody thinks they can draw.
Yeah.
But not everybody thinks they know After Effects and can animate with it. But so you're right. In the book, I basically try to split it. Do the jobs that pay you so that you can afford to do the jobs that don't pay you. The jobs that aren't going to pay you, don't try to make them pay you. Try to separate it, because otherwise I just think you're in for a frustrating ride.
Yeah, definitely. I have a thing that's similar, but I wasn't really including the money side of it. So if I get a project come in, pop in my email, I'm always okay, is it boring and easy, or is it boring and hard, or is it interesting and hard, or is it interesting and easy? And there's all of those work apart from boring and hard, because you don't want it to be boring and hard, but you could probably deal with interesting and hard, if that makes sense, or you can deal with boring and easy. And I think it's kind of a similar thing, but just putting the money aspect in there as well.
I love that. That's brilliant. And I would say too that, that worked for you. So for me, when I was trying to transition from freelancing to School of Motion, I focused entirely on boring and hard for clients that were tough, because they would pay these enormous sums of money. And so I would take on so there's a story, it's actually in the book and it's true. And this happened to me multiple times, where this client came to rely on me because nobody else in their right minds would spend this much effort and time and love on these videos and make them look the way I was making them. But I did it because I wanted them to keep coming back to me and keep paying me that rate. And there was a time where they called me up, and just to give people an idea of what that was, I would work on a project, maybe it would take 2 weeks, and I would bill, between $16,000 and $20,000. And there were no expenses other than me. So that was all profit. And so, they called me and they were had this last minute thing. They called me on a Thursday night. We need this by Monday. And it's a 2-minute fully animated piece with voiceover. And we need to see this user interface mocked up, but it doesn't exist yet. I mean, it was the worst case scenario. It was a nightmare. And it was not for a sexy client. It was not going to end up on my reel. It was boring. It was very technical. One of those videos where everything has to be right.
Yeah.
No, that button doesn't go to that screen. And we need legal on every single frame. And I only had 4 days to do it. And I gave them a bid, and they ended up calling me and asking me to raise the bid, because they were just so happy that I would drop everything and do it, that they actually paid me more than I asked them to. So that type of client, Haley, might at this point in your life just be an instant no. There's no way I'm doing that. But it served a purpose for me. It wasn't about, I want to be rich, I want to get a lot of money. It was, I want to do this. I want to have life be kind of crappy for 2 weeks. And then I want to take, 4 or 5 weeks off and make tutorials and see if I can get my audience to grow.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think me personally, I'm trying to think a bit more like that now, especially because of Motion Hatch. I mean, I'm taking 2 weeks off at the moment just to do all of this stuff, because as you can imagine, it's quite as you know, it's quite difficult to get like numbers of podcasts together and make all the website and everything and kind of get it ready to launch all at the same time. There's a lot of moving parts. So I want that to go well, obviously. So I'm kind of taking 2 weeks off after I've just done like quite a long, big project for a client. So, it's good because if you're full time, you can't do that. You can't plan for that. And then I also know that I've got work coming up in like November and December onwards. So I'm kind of in a lucky position, I guess, that I can do that a bit. And, the whole point of this and like the Freelance Manifesto as well, I think is like trying to just make people aware of these kind of things and that you can do that. Sometimes I've seen a lot of freelancers when I used to work at Google, they just like work all the time. They would never take a holiday or anything like that. They would never do anything else. They would like double book themselves and everything. And I've like never really been into that. I'm always like, okay, I'm going to work like these months and then I'm going to go away for a month or do something else, because I just thought like, if I'm going to be freelance, I want to take advantage of it. And that's what I think other people should try and do. But obviously you've got to be in that position to be able to say no to work and like feel okay about it because you know that you're going to have other jobs come up in the future.
Well, that's super scary. I mean, that's probably the scariest thing about being freelance. That's the thing I believe keeps most people from going freelance because they know that just baked into the freelance equation is there's going to be downtime. There's going to be times when no one's calling, you have nothing lined up, and just an infinite number of days before you with nothing to do and no money coming in. And, it just takes, I think, experience to realize that if you're good and you have some client management skills, you will always have work. I think to people on the other side that are maybe on staff and they're thinking about going freelance and they're saying, okay, well, who could my clients be? And they're thinking of like the 2 or 3 companies in their town that they know about. And they think, well, what if all 3 of them don't need me? Well, try one of the other 5,000 companies in the world probably more than that, to be honest, that need and are dying for freelancers. I mean, there's just not enough, And the other thing too is that even if there are enough, which there's not, but even if there are, there's this huge problem that no one has figured out how to solve of being able to find freelancers when you need them. Because it always happens, you find out at the last minute you need a freelancer and you call your 4 or 5 favorite ones and they're all booked.
Yeah.
And now you need a new one and you need them like in 3 days. And how do you make that happen? And that's where a new freelancer, that's when, if you sent an email 3 weeks ago, you're going to get the call, it's a numbers game.
I was just going to say that, like, that's when you get in there. If you're like the new freelancer or if you don't know this company, that's generally when they're going to call you, when they've kind of run out of all other options. And it sounds kind of harsh, but it's true. And actually you could go in there and they could be like, oh, now you're our favorite freelancer. You just have to be the one who makes that happen. You have to be the nicest person, I guess, and wanting to do the best work for them.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost discouraging sometimes how low the bar can be as far as freelancers go, depending on the company. Like if you're freelancing for a studio, someone that does motion design, most likely every freelancer there is awesome and good to work with. But if an ad agency calls you, because ad agencies are not motion design studios, some of them are sort of converting into motion design studios a little bit, but that's a different discussion. But a lot of ad agencies now hire freelance motion designers all the time. And typically the producer there that's going to hire you, they don't care that someone out there is 20% better designer than you. Yeah. They just want easy. So I know this person, I know they show up, I know the work gets done. That's it, done. And what that does is it lowers the bar for professionalism, for just being nice to work with, being easy to work with, knowing how to take revisions and things like that. And so if you get the call and you show up and you're just nice and fun and pleasant to be around and easy to work with, and revisions come in and you smile and say, yeah, no problem, I'll do those right now, it'll take me about an hour, you can very quickly become their favorite freelancer. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you talk a lot about that in the book as well. So do you think like kind of being the most helpful that you can be and, personality and stuff, do you think sometimes producers think that kind of trumps talent in a way, I guess?
I'd say it definitely trumps talent. This is one of the weird things that I think people don't really realize is that, motion design looks like a meritocracy from the outside, especially when you see like, okay, this person got featured on Motionographer. This person was in Stash. This person's talking at Fitzy. And all of those people that are doing those things and being featured are the best of the best. But like once you take one step down from the top of the mountain, it gets a lot messier. And so, if you are, Sander van Dijk, he's a really nice guy and easy to work with and brilliant. But even if he was a jerk, he'd still get lots of work because he's so good, right? Yeah. So like if you're that good, you can afford to be a little bit of a jerk. Like he's not. I have to stress, he's awesome. Sorry, Sander, I love you. So as someone that may have a little bit of imposter syndrome and you're looking at that work and you're saying, I'm not that good, why would anyone book me over someone else? You got to put yourself in the shoes of the person hiring you. Most of the time, it's going to be a producer who probably has great taste and may have even worked on motion design projects before, but may not have worked on very many. And the most important thing to a producer is, can I get this job done on time, as stress-free as possible, under budget? Their job is to make it happen. And so if they're like, okay, I could make it happen and the end result will be 10% prettier if I hire this person. Well, the client's not going to know the difference. Yeah. Right? And no one else that sees the final thing is going to have a clue that it's 10% better than what it could have been. But that person sometimes shows up late. That person randomly flakes out of bookings. Or maybe that person shows up on time, but whenever they get revisions, they roll their eyes and they groan and they whine and they do it,
I've seen that happen a lot. And you're like, you're a really good motion designer. Why are you doing that? I used to supervise a lot in my old company and I'd be like, you're really good. I just need you to do this job. And they'd be like, I don't want to do the job. I'm better than this job or whatever. And it's like, no, we're paying you to do this. Just do it, Yes. Yeah. It's like that you have to get rid of that ego. And so if you're 10% or 20% or 30% less good at something than someone else, but you smile and you make the people around you feel happy that you're there and you're reliable, they're going to book you every time. Quality, like that extra 20 or 30% doesn't mean anything to most clients. And really the only time that's really going to matter is if you're trying to win an award or something where you're being judged on it. But most jobs, you're not being judged other than, is the client happy? Did we solve their problem? And so try to take the ego out of it and just be a good team member, Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're not saying that you shouldn't aim to be like the best motion designer, but I think it's just about like when you're starting out, it's actually more attainable than you think it is. I think that's the point, right?
Yeah, just think of like your talent level as a cherry on top. It's not like you have to be at a certain level, but that level's not, it's probably lower than you think. And then the rest of it is professionalism, communication skills, reliability, personality, just being friendly. And then once you have those, you can build on the talent and you will progress. You will get booked at better places. You'll get better jobs. You'll be able to charge more. But to get your foot in the door at most places, it just takes being a good human,
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the book and a few like little points in there that I thought were really helpful and interesting. So one of them was you talked about when you did like a deal memo, which I think like is like an estimate kind of thing for clients. You don't really do like numbers of like rounds of amends, which I've heard a lot of people do. They'll say like, oh, so you've got like 2 rounds of amends or whatever, but instead you'll kind of set an end date for the project. And I just thought that was like kind of interesting thing to discuss really, because most people I spoke to will be like, okay, in my terms and conditions it says you have 3 rounds of amends or whatever, but I kind of agree with how you explained that in the book, if you want to go a bit into that.
Yeah, sure. So what you're talking about is most people, if they get booked by a client to make a video, they'll have some sort of contract or a deal memo, and it will say in there, I will give you 3 opportunities to give me revisions and I will do them. And after that, if you ask for more revisions, then I have to charge you more. So here's my problem with that is that I think it sets the whole relationship up off balance from the beginning. I think the best mentality you can have going into any client situation is, I want to help this person. I want to partner with them to achieve whatever it is that they're paying me for, and I want them to be happy, and I want them to like this process. And so if they know, okay, I only have 3 chances to change this video, and so I better get it right. 2 things happen. One is, if you show them something like a work in progress, right? And maybe they're not used to looking at work in progress. Maybe you didn't set it up very well in the email or over the phone, or maybe they just didn't like it. Maybe it just didn't fit what they wanted. Now they're panicked because now they have to use one of those rounds of revisions just to get the car onto the right track, right? And now they're thinking, shoot, I only have 2 more rounds of revisions, and now they're freaking out, and it puts all this pressure on them and on you.
Yeah.
And it also, sometimes clients definitely don't like this, but sometimes you do something and it's just good. It's like, yeah, that's what we needed. Thank you. Right? Like that could happen. But if they have 3 rounds that they've paid for, they're going to use them,
That's true. Yeah.
I get why people want to do that. They do that because clients, see, here's the thing. I think that's the wrong solution to a real problem. And the problem is that sometimes clients can't make up their mind and they ask for the moon and they change direction mid-course and stuff like that. And so that's super annoying as a motion designer. So the obvious solution is put a limit on the number of revisions, right? But the real problem is just that most of the time clients don't understand the ramifications of what they're asking for. So if you set an end date for the project, cool. Now you're both on board. That's the end date. We are now a team and we are working towards the goal of being done on this date. And I don't ever want a client to feel bad asking for revisions. They're paying me. It's their thing. It's not mine. Even if I think their idea is stupid and they're ruining the whole thing and they're taking the best part out, right? I'm sure everyone listening has had that happen.
Yeah.
It's fine. They're paying me. This isn't mine. It's theirs, right? So I'm just going to do it. But if they ask for something that's going to take us past that end date, all I have to say is, yeah, no problem. The only thing is, if I do that, it's going to require this and this and this. And that's going to take this amount of time, and it's going to push us past the end date that we agreed on, which means I'm going to have to bill for more time. And it's just such an easier way for a client to wrap their head around it, as opposed to saying, well, I know that you told me we're 95% done and you just want this one change, but you've already used up your rounds of revisions, so now I have to charge you for another one. It just seems like something a used car salesman would do. So I would actually love to hear, because I'm sure bigger companies with more on the line and millions at stake, maybe there is a reason for them to actually have rounds of revisions stipulated. But even there, I think good communication can solve 99% of the problems you'll run into as a freelancer. And just going in with the mentality that your client is your friend. They're on the same team as you. And just explain, in plain English, this is why this will take more time. It will take us past the end date that we agreed on. So I would have to bill you for more days, and that's it.
Yeah. Do you think that by doing that, though, you might fall into the trap of they expect you to be sat in that chair the certain amount of days that you specified? Because I think that's why people like to do the project fee and they like to do the certain amount of amends, because then kind of frees them up to let them do the work whenever they want, if that makes sense.
Well, I've never had a client ask me what my working hours are. If you're working remotely, typically it just never comes up unless that's something that you talk about ahead of time, right? So for example, on the project that I talked about where it was super fast turnaround, right?
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to have to get really fast feedback from the client. So I asked them, when are you guys available? All 5 of them on the creative team. When are you available to be in a room where I can send you something and you can instantly get back to me within 10 minutes? Because that's how fast I'm going to need revisions to get this done. And I said that right up front to them. And that's not even something I'd put in the contract or anything like that. It's just, I would just talk to the producer. Okay, yeah, we can get it done, but I'm going to need you guys to be available. Just tell me what the hours are. And so now I know, like, okay, I have to be working up until those hours and then submit. But I've never had a situation where, like we have an end date and then like a client calls me up and they're like, hey, I have a quick revision. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that in a couple hours. I'm actually picking my kid up from school or whatever. What, you're not sitting at home working? How dare you? Like that typically doesn't happen, and if it does, then the client's being really silly because, if you hire like a contractor to come replace your bathroom, like they don't come. I mean, it'd be nice if they did, but they don't come like and work 8 hours Monday through Friday and they're always there. It's like, no, they work it around other projects and what they're doing. And I never tried to hide that fact from clients. I was always very honest that, sometimes clients would ask me to do something and I'd say, sure, I can do it. I have another project I'm finishing up, so I probably can only do it like for maybe 10 hours this week. And then next week I'm gone Wednesday, but I could do it around that. And they're like, yeah, no problem. Just get it done. Yeah, most clients just want it done. If they're worried about you being in the chair the same amount of hours as them, then that's just jealousy. They're just jealous of your lifestyle. That's what that is. And you should never let that dictate how you work.
Yeah, because I've heard some motion designers saying like, oh, this studio wants me to go on Slack. I don't want to do that because then they're going to expect me to be like sitting there all day, every day, replying to their Slacks. But like you kind of said that you thought Slack was a good tool. So I guess you just mean like you need to just be open about these conversations, right? And tell them how you work and hopefully they're cool with that.
Yeah, so studios are kind of a different beast because if you're going to be doing freelance work for a studio, most likely it's not just you. You're an animator helping, like working with a designer, or you're designing with a team, or you're handing things off to an animator, or you're working with a team of animators on a project. And if that's the situation, then yeah, it really will slow them down if you're not working specific hours. But that's where just communicating like solves the problem. If when they book you, you suspect that that's what they want going in, just ask them. So do you guys need me to be working the same hours as you? I typically work flexible hours and I work late at night and I work in the morning. Does that work for you guys, or do you actually need me in the chair the same hours as you? And if they say, no, we need you in the chair the same hours as us, then you have the option of saying, okay, cool. Well, listen, like, unfortunately, my schedule is not going to allow for it. So thank you so much for the offer. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do this job. Or say, okay, and just, be on a schedule for a couple of weeks. Here's the thing. There's no rules, like if you've been on staff for most of your career, it's easy to think that there are rules and you're breaking the rules, but there's no rules. No one has to be in a chair 9 to 5. The only reason that exists is because it's convenient. If you have a team and you need everyone to be working together in the same room, well, you need the same working hours. And if you're signing up to freelance on a project like that, you may have to play by those rules. But, in the book, I talk about like different types of clients, and studios are amazing to work for different reasons. But typically studios aren't going to pay the highest rates. They're not going to give you the most flexibility, but you're probably going to get some cool work for your portfolio. But you go find a big ad agency that needs a bunch of design and animation for web videos for one of their big clients. It's just going to be you working from wherever, getting it done, managing the client, and they're going to pay you a lot. It's not going to be on your reel. It's not going to be sexy or cool, but it's just, pick and choose the types of jobs you want for different reasons.
So do you think like if you're kind of targeting the direct to client work or direct to companies, do you think that, we as freelancers should be promoting ourselves more as like a studio, if that makes sense? Or do you think you can say like, I'm an individual freelancer in like a shared studio space or whatever?
It's a really good question. I just talked to this guy, Brett Morris, recently, and he started with a partner. It's a studio. It's in Los Angeles called Ranger and Fox. And they do this amazing, like 3D, crazy abstract stuff. It's really amazing. And they're billing themselves as a studio, but it's just two of them. So they're kind of like taking the freelance model and sort of putting this facade of a studio up in front of it, which lets them scale. It keeps their overhead low. There's a lot of really smart reasons to do that. And so I think that like in terms of branding yourself as a studio versus as, Haley Aikens, it's really just a personal choice. And I guess it depends at what phase of your career you're at and how much. See, to me, the only reason that you need some other name, you need to be called Ranger and Fox is because you're taking on jobs that are so big that you need to build little teams every time you do it. And so it just kind of makes sense to operate like a company at that point, even if it's really small and there's only 2 people. But I found that like if you're working for Publicis, right, it's a huge ad agency, and if you're working for them, Publicis is not hiring you. Barbara at Publicis is hiring you. And Barbara is going to treat Haley Aikens a little bit different than she would treat Aikens Design Incorporated. There's a little bit of a disconnect when you put that facade of that corporation mask in front of you. So I recommend don't doing that until the jobs you're taking on are so big that it makes sense, and that's a longer discussion about like for tax purposes, for legal purposes. It's mostly just if you're going after rebrands, if you want to be doing rebrands freelance for like networks and stuff like that, they're not going to hire Haley Aikens, right? Even if Haley Aikens is perfectly capable of hiring a team of 10 animators and designers to work on this thing and manage the budget and hire a producer and do all those things, they're just not going to do that. But they would hire a company that really is just the front for Haley Aikens, right? So the truth is like the freelance manifesto sort of ends the manifesto before you get to that level, because most freelancers never get to that place. And once you get there, really like just starting a corporation and running everything through that, it's such an easy thing to do. And all it does is change the optics a little bit.
But yeah, because I think I was thinking of it like you say, if it's a big company, they kind of want to hire another company because maybe they trust that more. So maybe you wouldn't get as big of jobs if you were kind of just, you're a freelancer individual. And I think like it kind of leads on to a question I got from the Motion Hatch community, actually, from a guy called Christopher Harrison. And he was wanting me to ask you about, it would be interesting to hear your take on, when you're in a studio, there's kind of a hierarchy to climb, like junior, senior, art director, stuff like that. But if you're just a one-man freelancer band, where do you go after that? That's kind of where our conversation was just going about, like, maybe you make like your own kind of company, and even if it was like working remotely with other freelancers, do you think that's the next step?
Oh, what a great question. I'm so glad you asked that question. So I really recommend, if you haven't, go to Motionographer and find the article that I wrote. I wrote exactly about that question. It's called Too Old for MoGraph. And the crux of it is, it's kind of like asking the question, why are there not very many 50-year-olds in motion design? What do you do as a 50-year-old in motion design? But also it talks about what happened to me personally, which was I kept pushing myself to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so what I would ask Christopher is, what do you think your goal would be at that point? Let's say that you follow everything in the freelance manifesto and you're making $130K a year. I don't know where Christopher lives, but you're making like a really good salary and you're only working 9 or 10 months a year. What would be the point for you to go to the quote next level, right? Yeah. And I did that. I got to that point as a freelancer, and then I said, "Oh, I've made it. What's next?" And I started a studio, and that ended up like being a really bad decision for me. And I think the reason was because I didn't ask myself what the real point of it all was. So here's one reason you might want to start a studio. If you really love managing teams of artists and building really large, elaborate things, big projects with tons of moving parts, open a studio. That's a good way to do that. If you want to take 2 to 3 months a year off and make a good living, don't open a studio.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So where does it go? So that's a good question. So I have a buddy up in Boston. His name is Mike Beckman, and he's been freelance for years. And he's in his late 40s and he has kids, and he just wants to, like, for him at this point, it's about family. It's about quality of life. He doesn't care if he gets noticed for how great his work is. It is very good, but that's not important to him. And he just rebranded himself as Gyroscope Media. Now, I'm almost certain that it's still just him, and he probably hires people on, as his jobs grow. And that's just sort of a natural progression. So I was freelance operating as Joey Korenman, and I would have 3 jobs going on and a freelance producer and 2 freelance designers and a freelance animator. And I was very open with clients about this. I never hid it. And clients, once they trust you, they don't really care what name you put on the invoice, as long as you do it and it's done and it looks good and they like it, they don't really care if it's Joey Korenman or Toil, which was the name of my studio. But when you open a studio, it's easy to fall prey to, just kind of what happens. You get an office and maybe you hire somebody, maybe you spend some money on equipment and you start trying to charge more, which means that the client expectations go way up. And now they're not dealing with you, Christopher. They're dealing with your company, and they're going to treat it differently, and your problems are going to be different. And so you better be in it for the right reasons if you're doing that. I think that there is sort of a middle ground where, look, I have a friend, and I don't want to say his name, but he's a designer, and he's going to make freelance over $300,000 this year. So the earning potential for freelance is actually enormous if you do it right. Now, the clients that are letting him get to that revenue level are not sexy clients. They are not clients that are going to get him a Motion Award, but oh boy, do they have big budgets, right? So ask yourself why you'd want to go further. Is it, I want to make more money so I can, buy a big house or take a year off or whatever it is? Or do I want more prestige? Do I want to do work that's going to get me noticed and kind of get me accolades so I can have more opportunities? I mean, both of those things don't require you starting a company at this point,
Yeah, maybe Christopher should do the perfect day exercise and then he can figure out what he wants to do.
I recommend it, yeah.
Yeah, going back to the beginning now. So I've got another question from Austin Saylor, who says he's heard a lot.
Austin!
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, buddy.
He's a cool guy. He said he's heard a lot of positive words about School of Motion, the freelance manifesto, but he wanted to know how you handle criticism from people, because he feels like when you try and, not you particularly, but anybody tries to, sell something like a course or a book or something to the creative world, sometimes it can come back with some harsh words from people who you would consider peers. And he's said that he's witnessed you do like this gracefully in a couple of situations. So I think he just wanted you to kind of expand on that.
Sure. So this is something that, good Lord, look at the comments on Pat Flynn's website. This guy gives away information for free that literally changed my life. It's changing Haley's life.
Yeah.
It's this is amazing information, and people flame him and troll him all day long. So that is just the reality of putting anything out on the internet. And I'll tell you, when I sold the first course that we sold, Animation Bootcamp, at the time, there weren't really other courses that were selling for that price point. There was Animation Mentor, which was really expensive, but kind of in a different niche. I was terrified. And we did get emails from people, oh, you sold out. Now it's all about the money. So I do 2 things. So one is I never respond to people right away, ever. Because it's really easy to get fired up, and inevitably when someone makes a nasty comment like that, they don't have all the information. They have no idea why you're pricing things the way they are, or why you wrote that blog post the way you did, or, oh, it was just an honest mistake. They don't know any of that. And 2, and this is something that I feel actually very fortunate to have learned, the longer I've done this, I mean, fortunately, we don't get that much, like, I guess, bad comments. We don't get like flamed that much, but there's been a few times where we've stumbled. We launched a freelancing course a while ago before the Freelance Manifesto was written.
Yeah.
And when we launched that course, I did an experiment. I had been writing all of the copy for our sales pages up till that point, and it takes a long time. So I hired a professional copywriter to do it. And she came highly recommended, and she was expensive, and she wrote this copy that was guaranteed to convert into sales. And I put it up, and oh boy, did we get some nasty comments, like from people that I respected, from high profile people. And so I just sort of I just went away for a day and let the fear and the anger kind of die down. And then I just said, you know what, I'm just going to come clean. And I wrote basically a comment replying to everybody like, hey, by the way, this is what happened. We hired a copywriter. It was a mistake. I should have done it myself. It doesn't sound like us. We're really not trying to make a bunch of money. We actually donated $5,000 when we made that course. We immediately donated the first $5,000 of it to a charity. Yeah. And then as soon as you explain yourself and you just say like, hey, listen, I'm a real person. I'm just trying to provide something valuable here. Everyone apologized, and they were like, oh, no, it's fine. No, Joey, we love you.
Yeah.
So I think that most of that is, people having a bad day and they see something that offends them for one reason, and it makes them feel good to publicly crap on it. And once you recognize that, look, Austin, if you're trying to put something out into the world that you if you're putting crap out into the world, you deserve to be crap on. But I know you're not going to do that. Most people wouldn't do that. If you're putting something out and you feel that it's valuable and you're asking for a reasonable amount of money for it, you're going to get people that are upset because you're doing that, and maybe they're not, and maybe they kind of secretly want to, or maybe they think everything should be free and they can't wait to pirate your thing. But the truth is, if you're putting value out into the world, you shouldn't be ashamed to tell people about it and to ask for money for it. Because Haley, as you know, doing things like a podcast, it take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And it's unsustainable if you don't somehow make it worth your time. That's why I was so happy to hear that you're taking time off to do this. Because if you just try to fit it in around everything else, it'll be gone in 6 months. That's what happens to almost every tutorial site out there. It goes really strong for 6 months and it fails because you have to figure out how to charge for it. Otherwise, it will go away. One of my favorite tutorial websites ever was this site, Matt Trunks. Yeah, I believe he's French, and he's brilliant, man. Nothing we have ever done is as good as his tutorials. They are so good, and they're in French, but he dubbed them into English. And he tried to have a subscription service, and people stole it, and he got discouraged, and it just stopped, because it wasn't worth his time anymore. And so I sort of know now, we have to do this. If we don't charge for our stuff, then School of Motion goes away, and all this content and courses we make, they just don't exist anymore. There is no Freelance Manifesto. I mean, the Freelance Manifesto has still not made a profit. It was not intended to make a profit, but it hasn't. It costs a lot of money to produce that book. And I didn't do it to get rich or to make money. I did it because I thought the information should be out there. So I think just kind of being confident in your reasons for doing things, your motivations, it just kind of gives you a little bit of armor against that stuff. And then in the end too, you'll recognize that a lot of the people that complain, it's the same people over and over again. There's people, and I take notes and I remember those names.
That's a good
when they ask me for help and I help them, and then they trash me on Twitter, I remember that stuff and I notice who they are, and I just feel that they're probably just sort of cynical, complainy people, and that's just the reality. And it used to really bother me. You can probably tell it still does bother me a little bit, but it's so much less than it used to. And it's something you have to get used to. I mean, Haley, I can't imagine anyone flaming you or saying anything negative about you. But if you do this long enough, it will happen. Someone won't like whatever. They won't like a question you asked or something. But you're providing value and you're taking time out of your life. You could be billing for a client right now, and you're not. You're talking to me and just putting this out for free. So anyone who complains about that, I think, is just they need to take a good look in the mirror.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure no one's going to like flame Austin or anything because everyone knows he's like a really nice guy. So I don't think he has to worry. But, I can see why he's concerned. And, it's definitely like something like on my mind as well as I think about like how can I kind of put more into Motion Hatch and make that more sustainable. But I think as long as people are putting stuff out there that's valuable, and, if you do that and then, maybe charging a bit for something that is really good, that allows you to work more on, the podcast or the free stuff or whatever, then I think that makes sense to me. I think that's fine.
Yeah. And know that like if you put a product out, like let's say you had a course or a book or something and it was $50 and you put it out and 3 people email you angry because, like you give us all this free stuff and now you want our money. And like, I thought that this was about sharing knowledge and that you were in this for the right reason. You got to realize that for every person that writes something like that, there's probably like 500 that loved what you did and therefore are not going to like write to you. They just liked it and moved on with their life. The noisy people tend to be the ones that complain and find fault in everything. And the ones that like what you're doing, they're not going to like, it'd be nice if they did, but they're not always going to take 5 minutes and write an email saying, hey, I just want to let you know that was a great episode,
Yeah, definitely.
But, yeah. And that's the truth. Like there's a lot more people are going to love what you're doing than aren't, but the ones that don't like it are more likely to write something nasty.
Yeah, that's true. Hate is going to hate. Everyone always says that.
Exactly. Yep.
So I've got a couple more questions from the Motion Hatch community.
Sure.
Alexander Jones asks, in what order would you recommend doing the School of Motion courses, or does it matter?
There's definitely an order we recommend. So one of our newer courses is called After Effects Kickstart, and that's for people that either are very new to After Effects or have never touched it. And that gets you up to speed using the app, and you do a bunch of motion design projects, but it's really about learning that tool. And it's so much like we pulled out all the stops for that class. We hired Ariel Costa to do some designs for the students to use in their final project. It's really fun. Nice. So then from there, so once you have that, or if you already know After Effects, then you go into the classes that really build motion design skills. So we have Animation Bootcamp, which we typically recommend you take first. Then we have Design Bootcamp, which is, there's no animation. It's all about style frames, storyboards, coming up with ideas and learning the principles of design. Then we've got Character Animation Bootcamp, which is like probably one of the most fun classes. It's all, you get these character rigs and you learn like pose to pose method and walk cycles and throws and how to manage a scene, stuff like that. We have a companion course to that called Rigging Academy that teaches you to rig. We recommend you take that after. And then we have a new class that is actually in beta right now. It's running right now, but it's not for sale yet. It's called Explainer Camp. And that's kind of the culmination. Once you have all these skills, it's a project-based class. So now you use your skills on a real project. And we have teaching assistants, they critique you. We have podcasts that go along with it. We interviewed the founder of Think Mojo, the founders of Odd Fellows, Alan Lasseter, people like that. And then we're also building our first Cinema 4D class now, which I don't want to say too much about, but I'm so excited about that. That should be out in early 2018. And that would probably be somewhere in the middle that you could take that one.
Okay, yeah, I think that answers the question. I was going to ask about the explainer one because that seems more like kind of teaching you a bit more of the like client skills thing, I think, from what I've heard you talk about. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we take you through the entire process. So, and we really like to simulate a real client situation as best we can, in a class.
Yeah.
So we do things like we create fake clients with brand guides and scripts and briefs, and we record client phone calls. The instructor of the class is Jake Bartlett, a really amazing motion designer. He's one of the top teachers on Skillshare too. And he has like real client interactions with this client, and he sends them a bid, and then you have to create a bid for your job. And it really takes you through the whole thing all the way until you have delivered a 30-second piece for one of 3 clients that we came up with. And it includes, we hired voiceover talent to create voiceover tracks for the students to use. So the idea is we want students to leave this with like an amazing portfolio piece too, in addition to all the skills that go along with dealing with visual essays and scripts and coming up with visual metaphors and stuff like that. So I'm super excited about that class. We're still like, it's in beta right now and we're putting the finishing touches on it. It's going to be amazing. And it should be out this winter.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I haven't really heard of any of the courses. I like that. I don't think so. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I hope people like it. I mean, so far the students that are in it seem to be having a good time.
Yeah, cool. So I've got one more question from Nikki Nilsson. I think that's how you say it. I'm wondering what his best tips are for dealing with potential clients who don't understand why freelance MoGraph services are so expensive. She says that she gets gasps and disbelief from companies that she sends proposals to, and even when she explains every step and the time that it will take.
So my advice is don't waste your time with them. And here's why. You're never going to convince someone that you're worth more than they think you are, right? So, and I'll caveat that. If you say this video will cost $2,000, 2,000 pounds, and they say, whoa, well, we only have 1,500. Okay, you're not that far off. You can work with that. But if they say, oh, we were thinking 250 because we looked on Fiverr.com and we can get a whiteboard video done for $15.
Yeah.
So we thought we'll spend 250 and get something good. That you're never going to convince that client that they should instead, pay 10 times that amount. And so that client's just not, I think you should probably take the time to like write an email explaining just very nicely and don't, I wouldn't get upset about it because it's not like they're being mean. They don't know, I mean, you'd be surprised, like being in this industry, you really understand how long it takes to design a character and rig them and animate them and find a music track and edit it and like all those things. It takes forever. But to some clients, they're like, well, there's a computer program that does all that, right? And you just click the button that says girl, brown hair, walk to the right, and it happens, right? Yeah. And it's not obvious. That's not how it works. So I would probably just have some sort of like formulaic thing that I would always say like, well, my services, cost more than that because of the level of detail and, and client service I bring to it. And so it sounds like your budget may just not be able to, support that. And I understand that. And if you are trying to get motion design for that inexpensive, I would recommend, I always try to leave the client with something like, even if they have no money, I try to recommend like go to Fiverr.com, get on Craigslist. You're not very likely to find a good motion designer who can do it for that price. Like give them a reality check, but don't shove their face in this. Just say, hey, look, this is what it costs and it takes a long time. It takes longer than you might think. And if you really only have that much, get on Fiverr, get the whiteboard video, call it a day,
Yeah, I think she was saying after that sometimes they do that and then they think that she's trying to con them or something, which I thought was like crazy. Like,
well, and you can't hold it against them because they don't see a difference, like to someone who runs a personal training business and they want to get clients that, that they can do personal training for, and they want a little explainer video explaining how their method is better than some other trainers. They honestly can't look at a whiteboard video from Fiverr and something from Oddfellows and see much of a difference. Oh, that one's more colorful. They're just not used to looking at it and they're not judging it the same way we are. They're not looking at it as a craft the way we do. They're looking at it as a commodity. This is supposed to be a video that imparts information, nothing more, nothing less. That's what I need. And I think a lot of motion designers get caught up in that and they feel offended that that's even a thing. But it's just reality. Like some people just need a really crappy whiteboard video and that's all they can afford. And frankly, that's all they need. It will get them business. That's kind of a sad fact of motion design is that the better an animator you become, the more After Effects expressions you learn, it doesn't actually sell any more product for your client, right? And in the end, if someone's paying you to do something, it's because they want your video to sell something for them. So always keep that in mind and just know that there's a lot of clients out there that can't afford you and they never will be able to. And just leave them with a good feeling and best of luck. And here's some sites to check out for cheaper motion design and move on. Go find some more clients.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Well, I think that's all my questions that I have. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I just want to say thanks for having me on. This was a really fun chat. And, I hope everyone listening gets something out of it. And I look forward to seeing Motion Hatch grow and prosper and become a worldwide phenomenon.
Thanks again to Joey for coming on the show. Now, if you want to get involved with more conversations about the business side of motion design and animation, we actually have a free Facebook community you can join. If you go to motionhatch.com and sign up there, then I'll send you an invite to our free group. There's about 700 motion designers in there at the moment. It's so great, and everyone's been really helpful to each other, asking questions and answering questions. So I'd love to see you in there. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, it would be really great if you could go over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. That helps the podcast get out to more people. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Next week on the podcast, we have Wednesday Studio, so watch out for that one. See you soon.